Okay, everyone. So, Boruto 2 Blue Vortex Chapter 27 is officially released, and I'm here to give you guys my review. And before we get into it, as always, I do have to ask that you do all of the YouTube things if you want to support what I do here on this channel. Like, share, subscribe, comment down below with your thoughts. Now, let's go ahead and get into this chapter because we do have some stuff that we need to talk about. Some information got revealed, and the fight that's about to happen has been officially set up in this chapter. Right at the end, we have Mamushi officially entering Konoha, and his hunt for Ada has officially started here in this chapter. So let's just go ahead and dive right into it. So, right at the beginning of the chapter, we are immediately picking up right where the previous chapter ended, with Damon with his hand around both of Sarada and Sumire's necks, and he immediately lets go. Now, I think, again, a lot of us pretty much predicted that that's exactly what was going to happen. You know, nothing was going to happen to either of these characters because Sarada, obviously being a main character, she wasn't going to get killed off, and Sumire obviously still has a role to play in the story. So obviously neither of them were going to get killed, but essentially Damon reveals here that essentially, for as strong as Sarada is, Damon could still kill her whenever he wants. That's basically what he's telling them. That, you know, now that I know you guys are a threat to my sister and I know you guys basically can't kill her, I want you to know that if you try anything, I can kill both of you and neither of you would even know that it happened. And Sarada, understandably, is asking him, you know, why didn't you kill us? I mean, because Damon is not wrong. We are technically a threat to Ada. So why didn't you kill us? And this is where Ada steps in. And this is where we get confirmation of why Sarada and Sumire are immune to omnipotence. And I think it's pretty much the answer that a lot of people predicted was the case. I know there were a lot of theories about, oh, maybe Sarada has like a hidden power that made her immune, but that doesn't explain Sumire. And there were a lot of theories, you know, surrounding her, possibly, you know, maybe some ties to the Otsutsuki and all that stuff, because we know that when it comes to omnipotence, the only people who are immune to it are Otsutsuki and people who are related to her by blood. And since neither Sarada or Sumire are related to her by blood, as far as we know, then there had to be some Otsutsuki connection. A lot of people said that, oh, maybe it's because they're both in love with Boruto, who is an Otsutsuki. And I'm not going to lie, I'm really, really happy that that's not the direction that it went, because they do address that in this chapter, and they even basically debunk that theory, saying that it doesn't really make a lot of sense, because if that's the case, if being in love with an Otsutsuki is all it took, then why is it that other people who also have feelings for Boruto or Kawaki, why aren't they immune to omnipotence? Why are Sarada and Sumire the only ones who are immune? And this is where we get again, confirmation of what must have happened, is that Ada basically made them immune to it. She made them immune to omnipotence. And when Sumire asks why, is because Ada wants a true, genuine connection with those two girls. She actually wants to be, you know, friends with them. She doesn't want them to be immune to omnipotence, or she doesn't want them to be affected by omnipotence. Now, my only issue with this explanation is it doesn't really explain why Ada's never had that before, because if her craving genuine connection was all it took, then why is it that she didn't essentially subconsciously remove omnipotence's charm effect on people? You know, because she has said that all she wanted her entire life is to have genuine connections with people, but omnipotence got in the way of that. And now the explanation they're giving us for Sarada and Sumire being immune is because she wanted a genuine connection with both of them, and she subconsciously made them immune to it. And I'm just wondering, well, if that's the case, then why hasn't it happened before? I mean, this can't be the first time that she has genuinely wanted connections with people. Like, Sarada and Sumire can't be the first ones. There had to have been others. So, like, I don't know. To me, it just feels like, okay, we're giving an explanation, but it's not really one that's sort of airtight. Like, it's one that you, like, if you think about it for just a little bit, it doesn't really kind of falls apart a little bit. You know what I mean? Like, it just feels a little bit of a weak explanation, but at the same time, I feel like it's kind of the only explanation that actually makes sense. Like, her subconsciously making them immune to it. I don't know. It's just, it just feels a little bit of a flimsy excuse, at least for me personally. I would have liked something a little bit more. And Ada even says that one of the things that motivated her to make them immune to it was something that Sarada and Sumire said to her, and it was back during Boruto Part 1, during that conversation they had when they were, all, on the bed, and they were having that, conversation about, liking Kawaki or Boruto and all that stuff. And basically Sarada says, hey, how about we, just, be friends? And that made her really happy. And that must have made her subconsciously want to, be a friend, or subconsciously make them immune to omnipotence. But again, it's like, it feels kind of like a flimsy excuse, at least for me personally. Okay, I understand if other people are completely okay with it, that's fine. But for me personally, it just feels, I don't know, like I'm just not really a big fan of it. And then we get to an interesting moment. So after that, she basically points out how basically, while she doesn't believe that Sarada and Sumire are going to hurt her, she also is not against the idea that they were the ones to kill her if, let's say, it ever came to that. And that moment basically made Sarada want to essentially see Ada as like an actual friend, because she basically, like, Ada made it clear to them just exactly how she feels about them for real. And that's when Sarada, I think, like, we see this moment where they basically like become friends for real. Like now they actually are friends, as opposed to before where they were still sort of kind of pretending to, be friends with her just to not get on her bad side and not to piss off Damon. And I think even Damon sees it, because he even sees he even has a smirk on his face when he sees this moment between them. Like, okay, like now he knows it's real. And I think now he's going to leave them alone. But let's just talk about this for a moment. This moment where Ada talks about how, she's not going to be against Sarada and Sumire killing her if it ever came to that. Now, this is possibly setting up that Ada is going to essentially possibly get killed. Now, I personally don't know whether it is going to happen, but it does feel like the story is kind of like trying to tell us that this is possibly going to happen. And I feel like story-wise it would make sense, because if you think about it, with Ada and with Kashin Koji, I'm going to talk about Koji in a minute, because when we get to his part in the chapter. But with Ada, one of the things that she kind of does with the story is that she kind of removes some of the stakes. And what I mean by that is, because of her Senrigan ability, how she can basically like constantly spy on the enemy, get information from them, and deliver it to Konoha and everything. I feel like that kind of like removes the tension a little bit, because one of the things that I really liked about Naruto, the manga, and even in Boruto Part 1, is whenever they come up to, whenever they are facing a threat, they are going into it blind. They don't really know what kind of threat they're going up against. And essentially we, as the readers, just like with the, characters like Naruto, Sasuke, Boruto, Kawaki, and all these guys in Konoha, we're essentially there with them, where we don't know what these characters can do, what their abilities are, what their weaknesses are, and we're basically figuring it out along with them. Naruto was really good at doing this whenever it came to going up against the antagonist. And something that was definitely lost with Boruto 2 Blue Vortex is having characters like Ada, and again with Kashin Koji, which I'll talk about in a minute, is that they kind of removed that. And that's just one thing that's always bothered me about Boruto 2 Blue Vortex ever since 10 Directions got involved. And then it made me sort of think about, not Omnipotence, about the Senrigan, is that it does kind of take away that feeling of tension, that feeling of discovery, I guess you could say, where we're again discovering things along with the characters. And it just feels like that's not really there anymore. And it's kind of just something that's always bothering me, and something that I wish they would remove from the story so we can get back to that. Then we get to Kashin Koji, and this is interesting. So this is where he is basically revealing Mamushi's ability to Shikamaru and Boruto and Inogen. And he's basically revealing that Mamushi's ability is to split himself. So essentially it's like the divine version of the Shadow Clone Jutsu. And what he means by that is basically he can split himself, and there's no limit to how many clones of himself he can make. And unlike with the Shadow Clone Jutsu, and this is something Boruto himself even brings up, so his ability is like making shadow clones. But this is where Kashin Koji corrects him and says, no, it's different, because unlike with shadow clones, when he makes clones of himself, he doesn't get weaker. So if you don't remember, with shadow clones, when you make clones of yourself, your power is split evenly among each clone. So if you make, let's say, if you make 3 clones, there's you and the 3 clones you make. Each of you have 25% of the original's 100% power. So unlike with that, when Mamushi makes 3 clones, each of them are as powerful as the original. So there's no decrease in power. Now you might think, okay, well, that's a little overpowered. Like if he can make as many clones of himself as he wants and there's no decrease in power, that's kind of broken. Like why would that feels like kind of a broken ability. But this is where Koji tells them about the weaknesses of his ability, and he basically says the more clones he makes, the simpler they become. Basically they become stupid, and that's an ability they can exploit. So basically he's not going to be as intelligent when it comes to battle as he would be if it was just one, or even if there were, let's say, 2 of himself. And basically he says that what you should do, he tells them that when he does invade Konoha, just wait for him to multiply himself, so that way his intelligence could get to a level where they can deal with him no problem. Even if he has all this power, if he doesn't have the intelligence to use it, then it doesn't matter. And we did see that a little bit with Hidari during his fight against the Konoha shinobi, where he was using Chidori, but because he was not fully aware of the ability and its weaknesses, it wasn't really all that effective. It's how Sarada was able to essentially, counter him when he tried to use the ability on her. If he had the Sharingan, then if we're being honest, she would have been dead right then and there. But because she didn't, and because she had the Sharingan and she was able to predict his movements, she was able to counter him with her own. And he also reveals that there are more weaknesses to Mamushi's ability. So he also says that when you destroy the clones, you have to destroy both of the eyes, because when the eyes are destroyed, that clone can't make more clones, which makes sense because this is obviously like his Rinnegan ability. We've seen that every Shinjuu have a specific Rinnegan ability, and this is Mamushi. So if you destroy the Rinnegan, you lose that ability. So again, makes sense, pretty in line with the lore that's already been established. But he also warns them that if you destroy too many clones, then his intelligence goes back up and he'll be once again difficult to deal with. And he tells them that they should aim for like 20 to 30, round them all up, and then just destroy them all at the same time. And this is where Shikamaru brings up a good point, which is, what if he leaves the original body back at the hideout and just sends the clones? And then he says, you don't have to worry because the clones instinctually will try to gather together. So even if he leaves the original behind, the original will still go to Konoha and go to the flock. So you don't have to worry about that. And this is where Inogen again also brings up a good point, which is, why does the fight have to specifically be in Konoha? Like, why don't you attack him before he gets to Konoha? That way, of course, you can minimize, any damage and, of course, any casualties. But then that's where he brings up Jura, because he brings up Jura and how Jura basically has taken a liking to Konoha, the culture, the shops and everything. And he basically instructed to the Shinjuu that nothing is to happen to Konoha because otherwise they'll have to deal with him. And he basically tells them that, Mamushi will make sure to follow Jura's orders because of his fear of Jura. And he basically tells them that even if Mamushi, let's say, clones himself to the point where his intelligence goes down to just the level of an animal, he still will not harm Konoha because his fear of Jura will still be there. It's going to prevent him from, destroying Konoha or basically causing any harm that could lead to casualties. And this is where he also reveals that on an instinctual level, he will hunt his target, which is Ada, but he also will make sure to not piss off Jura. Like, those instincts are still going to be there no matter what. That's why Konoha is essentially the perfect battlefield. And this is where we get to Koji and what I want to talk about with him in 10 Directions. I already talked about it a little bit, but I'll, expand a little bit more here. Here is where he tells Inogen that he needs to master a new ability, which is essentially an ability that is similar to the mind transmission jutsu, but it's a better version of it. And just like with Boruto, just like future Boruto figured out everything that current Boruto already knows, Inogen in the future already figured this out for himself. He's just teaching it to the current version. And he tells him that he needs to master it in 2 days. And the reason for that, or the reason why he came up with the jutsu, because he wanted to avenge Himawari. So let's just talk about that for a minute. So this is the first time we're hearing Koji mention anything about Himawari when it comes to what he saw with 10 Directions. So we didn't see him mention it before, or mention her before, when he sent Boruto to the village to deal with, Jura and Hidari. So this is where we hear from him that apparently something happens in a future timeline to Himawari where she dies. And I'm curious if we're going to get more details about that and whether or not this is maybe possibly setting up something. I don't think it's going to lead to Himawari's death, but I feel like this is possibly leading to something. That's just the sense I'm getting with this statement that was made by Koji, or the writers choosing to have Koji say this statement, because they could have just had him say that, this is an ability that you develop to help you protect Himawari in the future, to help her deal with any threats. But instead, no, they had to specifically say he developed this to avenge Himawari. So something is going to happen with her. And I think we know this because when we got the chapter where Koji got the update, in one of the possible futures we saw Himawari was there. So something is definitely going to happen with her. And this is where Inogen is showing his resolve, saying that I don't even need 2 days to master the jutsu. I'll do it in 1. And we also see Boruto throughout this conversation. It cuts to Boruto giving his reaction to what Koji is saying. And I'm wondering if Boruto was not aware of this, like if he's hearing this for the first time, that Himawari could possibly be in danger. And this is where we cut to, I said I wanted to talk about Koji. Yeah. So like I said earlier with Ada, I am personally really not a fan of Koji having this ability, 10 Directions, and being able to see the future, and basically him essentially kind of just giving the information of his enemies to the Konoha shinobi, and by extension the Sand shinobi when they were dealing with Ryu, basically telling them everything that they need to know in order to deal with the enemy. Again, I'm not a big fan of that because, again, it takes away the mystery. Like, it takes away that feeling of discovering their abilities as you fight them, and just the tension that comes with that. The fact that because you don't know, something could happen that leads to someone possibly dying because you didn't have any information. And I feel like that's kind of gone right now with Boruto. Like, it's not really here because of 10 Directions, because of, the Senrigan. Now, they did kind of deal with the Senrigan a little bit by having Mamushi there, someone who could see Ada using the Senrigan. And it's just, I don't know. I don't really like it. And I really do hope they do something with it, because as long as Kashin Koji is there, and as long as he's just feeding them this information, essentially, like, he's in a way sort of like helping them go through this on easy mode. You know what I mean? It's like having someone play a game, and instead of having them, play the game and actually figuring out everything on their own, like trying out different combos and basically figuring out the mechanics on their own, and eventually getting to the point where they're so good that they can just deal with all the enemies no problem. And now it just feels like you gave someone a game and you just told them everything. Like, this is how you deal with this enemy. This is like what they're weak against. This weapon is really good against them. And just telling them everything, not letting them discover it on their own. That's just sort of what it feels like to me with Koji and 10 Directions. And I'm just personally not really a big fan of it because, again, it kind of takes away the tension from the story. And it's something that I really hope they deal with in the future, but I feel like maybe not. I don't know. So then we cut to the lab with Amato and Kawaki. And this is where they're basically reviewing the footage, and they're seeing Jura and everything, everything that Kawaki saw when he fought against him. And Kawaki is basically asking him, like, can you figure anything out? And Amato does confirm that the tree that we saw Jura sitting on is also the divine tree itself. So, which I think a lot of us pretty much already figured that out, because it was able to heal Jura, and we saw it heal Hidari, previously in chapter 6, if I remember correctly. So we kind of already knew that. We're just getting confirmation of that here in this chapter. And he also confirms that, this tree doesn't just heal wounds. It can also be a shield. It can also be a weapon. And this is where Kawaki is wondering, like, okay, so does that mean this guy doesn't have any weaknesses? And Amato is trying to tell him, like, basically forget about weaknesses. There's a chance this guy is just, it's impossible to kill this guy. And Kawaki, fights back against it, saying that no, he can't be taken down. I felt it when I fought him. Now, keep in mind, this is the same Kawaki who said that I fought the guy for a little bit before, this was obviously before he got Amato to, release his limiters. And he said that he felt like this guy's power was so vast that even if that him and Boruto working together might not be able to take the guy down. But now he's saying the opposite to Amato. And my personal view of this is he's basically telling Amato what he wants to hear so Amato can do what he is asking him to do, which is to basically boost his power. Because if he told Amato that, yeah, I agree, I fought this guy and I could tell that this guy just is so powerful that there's a chance we might not take him down. And he says, okay, well, yeah, but I need you to give me more power so I could fight against this guy. Amato could just respond with, well, if you believe this guy is so strong, then it doesn't matter if I give you more power because you'll still lose against him. But if he tells him that no, he can't be taken down, Amato might be more amenable to actually giving him power. But Amato tries to essentially warn him that doing to Kawaki what he already did, which is, to essentially give him more power, is going to not be good for him. But before he could give out the warning, this is where we see Kawaki just essentially act more like Jigen, where he grabs Amato by the throat and is basically threatening him, telling him that unless you give me what I want, you're not going to get what you want. And here's the thing. Amato at this point would be basically well within his right to essentially tell Kawaki to fuck off, basically, like, based on what's happening. But he still is trying to warn him, obviously, because Amato needs Kawaki to, put the karma on, the clone that he made of Ada, of his daughter. But he's still trying to warn him that, listen, any more power and your body won't be able to withstand it. So basically, it'll be like what happened with Jigen, where Jigen's body was not capable of handling Ishiki's full power. And this is where Amato is trying to warn Kawaki that the same thing is going to happen to him. And he tells him, like, listen, how are you planning to fight Jura if you end up self-destructing first? Like, it's not going to matter. And then Kawaki basically tells him that, okay, well, now you're just going to have to take the risk. Make a bet. Like, am I going to kill Jura first or am I going to die first? And I feel like this is definitely going to come back and bite Kawaki in the ass because, when you usually in stories, when you have characters try to, warn someone that, hey, like, if you go down this route, it's not going to end well, usually something comes of it in, later on in the story. And I'm wondering if it's going to happen before or after the fight that we saw with him and Boruto at the beginning of the story. So I'm wondering if maybe it's going to possibly happen afterwards. So after that, we cut to the interrogation room. And this is where we see Konohamaru being interrogated for possibly being the one who helped Boruto escape. This is where we see Konohamaru, and he basically is telling Kovu, the aide to the feudal lord, he's basically telling him that he is starting to see some contradictions between the people's view of Boruto as a traitor and what Boruto is doing, which makes sense because, there's only so much that Boruto could do before Konohamaru and others finally start to see that, okay, maybe there's something going on here. Because what Boruto's doing and what we're being told, it doesn't add up. There's something going on here. And maybe Konohamaru is also on his way to figuring out that, okay, maybe his memories were manipulated because, again, there's just way too many contradictions for me to ignore. And this is where we get the inner dialogue from Kovu, and he says that, okay, I don't believe Konohamaru is the mole because, he just doesn't have the personality for it. He doesn't feel like someone who would do this. And ironically enough, as he's saying this is where we get Konohamaru being contacted by Shikamaru to basically act in a way like a mole. So a little ironic that he says this and then something happens with Konohamaru that may end up proving that what he initially thinks of Konohamaru is going to end up being incorrect. And while he is talking to Shikamaru using, the mind transmission jutsu, we see Sai carefully looking at Konohamaru, and I think Sai is definitely figuring out what's going on because he is married to Ino and he is a part of the sensory unit. So Obviously, he would know if someone is speaking to someone using mind transmission jutsu. So I think Sai is definitely either figuring it out or has figured it out. And we cut back to Sumire and Sarada tries to leave with Sumire when she says that she has to go back to the lab, but Ada is keeping her there to obviously, continue whatever conversation they had. And Sumire uses the opportunity to just dip and basically bail on Sarada, which I thought was kind of funny. And as she's leaving, this is where we see Boruto, and he's basically telling her about the technique or one of the techniques that Sasuke taught him during the 3-year time skip, or during the year that they were together before, they both essentially lost to Code, and Sasuke ended up getting sealed in the, the tree. And he tells him about the technique that Sasuke taught him, which is to continuously run your chakra through your weapon to increase its, durability and its sharpness. And he talks about how during his fight against Jura, he lost focus for a moment and the sword ended up getting chipped. And this makes sense because if you remember in chapter 5, during the flashback, what Sasuke told Boruto is that he is going to have to take his techniques that he taught him and he's going to have to refine them. He's going to have to refine them. He's going to have to keep doing that until he gets them perfect. And that's what's going to lead to Boruto essentially becoming a fighter that is basically going to be unstoppable. Now, obviously, I don't think that's necessarily true because, it is a shonen, and shonen do have a tendency to constantly reintroduce enemies that, kind of prove that statement wrong. But I think we know what Sasuke was basically trying to tell Boruto. And and we see that essentially happening here where Boruto, even though he has gotten good at using Sasuke's techniques, he obviously still has some room for improvement because, like he said, he did lose focus and the blade ended up getting chipped, which honestly, he's kind of lucky that that's all that happened because considering he was going up against an opponent as strong as Jura, he's lucky the blade just didn't snap in half. And this is where he's asking Sumire to fix it. And he gives her a scroll that has a technique on it, and Sumire instantly recognizes it, and he tells her that it's technology that doesn't actually exist yet because she hasn't developed it yet. So this is obviously something that he learned from Kashin Koji via 10 Directions, and he tells her, okay, I can't tell you anymore, but can you still, fix it? And this is where she tells him that, okay, if I do this, then the sword is going to be completely different. Like, are you okay with that? And this is where he tells her that, if it makes the blade stronger, I don't think my master would be against it, which this obviously pays off what Sasuke earlier in part 1 tried to, or not just Sasuke, but even Sasuke and Naruto tried to teach Boruto in part 1 that, we're getting into a time in the shinobi world where we've got all this technology and it's really advanced. And we could come to a time where technology and ninjutsu could work together to make each other stronger. Now, where they are where some people fall short of that is when they rely on either purely ninjutsu or science. And, the series is trying to essentially tell us that, no, you need to have them work together, which is essentially the same lesson as what the Naruto manga tried to teach us, which is that, some people focus on mind and some people focus on body, but they don't focus on the other. And you have to have both working together in order for you to realize your full potential. And we saw multiple examples throughout the series where when one is slacking on the other, they tend to fall short. So we're basically seeing a similar theme in Boruto, which is, is a sequel to Naruto, so it makes sense, where now it's ninjutsu and, ninja tech having to work together to make someone incredibly powerful. And we're seeing that here. And right before she leaves, she says, don't call me class rep, just call me Sumire. And Boruto just has this, this sort of blank, look on his face where he's like, okay, like what was that about? So basically like confirming what Sarada and Sumire said earlier, that he's just completely clueless. Like he has no idea what both of them, feel about him. And I can't help but feel like maybe because of what happens literally right after this, I can't help but feel like maybe this is because I'm getting death flags from Sumire. I could be wrong, but that's just kind of what it feels like to me because I don't know. It's just, it kind of feels like something is going to happen with her, because immediately after this, we see Mamushi and he's about to invade the village and he's telling his clones to erase their chakra signature so the surveillance team can't, find them. And this is definitely something I see coming up in the next chapter, because remember what we were told about them, where the more clones, the less the intelligence. So I'm guessing it's going to get to a point where the intelligence is going to fall so low that they're going to forget to erase the chakra signatures, and then immediately the sensory unit is going to be able to pick up where each of the clones are. That's just what I'm getting from what we got right here. So that's pretty much where the chapter ends. Now, overall, it was an okay chapter. Didn't like everything about it. I already went through what they are, but overall, I thought it was an okay chapter. Now, let me know your thoughts, guys, in the comment section down below. And if you enjoyed this video, I really would appreciate a like, especially if you watched up until the end of this video, because I know it's a bit of a long video. It's 30 minutes long. But if you enjoyed it, if you liked it, remember to leave a like, share the video out there, subscribe if you are new, ring the bell for notifications, comment down below with your thoughts, and I hope I'll see you for my review of chapter 28. Bye for now.